Is that okay?
Yeah, if you can mute, and we'll 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 be engaging with one another as we go through the afternoon. And I welcome you back, and I'm so glad to see you, um, to to again connect around loss, grief, and transformation, growth. Um, And as we do again, and as we began last week, I'd like to just simply stop for a moment before I introduce uh, two guests and panelists with me today, but just to take a moment to quiet ourselves, to become present here together, just breathe. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us, melt us, mold us, fill us, use us. Spirit of the living God, fall afresh on us. Amen. Today, our goal is to open the floor really to your questions and to your thoughts. That may be a journey in itself, as we kind of have to listen to one another on Zoom. So I'll try and have you wave, and as you wave, I'll try and call on you as we go through, and have you ask your questions. Before we do that, I want to introduce our two panelists, and then I'm going to do a summary kind of last week, so we kind of get our minds refreshed again as to where we were. I have known Chris Malsalski Gogan. You know her from St. Francis for years. It's joy, and as you know her, I have known her, and she now is with myself and with Eileen, who I will introduce, on the Learning Community for Loss, Grief, and Transition, which is a new organization in the community, a new nonprofit that's focused on the education of people around loss, grief, and transition. We don't do groups particularly, but we do educational events and education experiences, and we'll invite you before we're through today, if there's those of you who wish to learn more about it or become more involved in other workshops that we might have, or even to help us on our way to do so. So that, Chris, why don't you just take for a moment and introduce yourself and share.
Sure. Thank you, Frank. And thank you to all of you for allowing me to be present with you today. I'm really delighted to spend this afternoon with each of you. As Frank's mentioned, I'm part of this new group, the Learning Community for Loss, Grief, and Transition. And we're pretty excited about some of the things that we've been able to accomplish so far. And really, and having people understand that grief is part of our lives, right? I mean, it is just such a part of our lives. Um, it became a really, really intimate part of my life and my family's life 12 and a half years ago when our son died by suicide. And as some of you know here, because I know you from St. Francis, I'm a long-term member. Um, I think a lot of you have seen me go through this process. And grief is a process, isn't it? It's a it's part of our lives, it's part of our being. But since that time, I've really learned to I've really learned a lot about the human heart. And I believe that the human heart is capable of holding an immense amount of pain, not just for ourselves, but for others as well. So throughout this afternoon, my hope is that we'll be able to share together, to share our stories, to listen well to each other, and just be together in this afternoon. So I thank you for allowing me to join you today.
Thank you, Chris. Eileen Adler is also a member of our board of the learning community. I've known Eileen again now for a number of years. Uh, she and I first connected through the divorce recovery program. And she was going through the divorce recovery program and then later became one of our major leaders and one of our leaders in the divorce recovery program across Tucson, and remains such. So it's been wonderful to know her and to watch the change and growth that comes out of loss that is such a major loss such as divorce. So Eileen, share yourself a bit.
I too am thrilled to be with all of you, and thank you for taking me in and allowing me to be part of this group for today. I thought I had suffered a few losses prior to divorce, and as a school counselor, which I was for most of my career, I don't think there was a week that went by that a family didn't come in that was in turmoil and going through divorce. And I helped them through, some tough times. I had no clue about the true emotional, physiological turmoil and grief that goes through with losing that kind of relationship until I went through it myself. And as Frank said, I went through the divorce recovery program, and as most of my situation goes, I always get tapped for leadership. Imagine that. So into divorce recovery and the board, and then eventually when Frank divorced us because he went on to bigger and better things, I kind of took over the program and grew it even more so. And now we are in the process of merging with Jewish Family Services so that there will be a safety net for the program no matter what. And I've had the privilege of meeting Chris and some other just incredible people who are into wanting to create programs for learning on how to cope with grief, loss, and transition in the Tucson community. And I'm thrilled to be part of that. You'd think grief, loss, and transition, what a horrible, hard thing to try to get through. And it is for some of us and some not so bad, but the more we learn and the more we can help others learn that grief and loss is all part of life. And that's the way it goes. I will say that in retirement, I've been allotted a little bit of time to tap into my creative side, which I think has been my saving grace to managing grief loss and then making my transition into a healthier, happier person. So welcome to all of you, and I look forward to working with you.
Thank you. Thank you, Eileen. I'm going to host disabled participant screen share. Jim, can you make sure I'm co-host here?
Say that again?
I'm asking Jim Wilbank if I can.
There you go. You should be there now.
Okay,
Sorry, I forgot to do that.
that's okay.
And for those of you that didn't know I make mistakes, there you go. That's a free one.
Well, last week, as we were sharing, we began with the fact that loss is a part of our lives, and it comes in all sorts of dimensions, in all sorts of ways. And that this year, during this year of COVID, we have experienced many, many different kinds of losses. Some of those losses have been major and some have not been. And we talked last week about losses being small, the small daily losses of our lives, what I call mini losses, the roll losses, the midi losses, the losses of change that oftentimes occur as a result of moving from one place to another. A lot of COVID has brought about roll losses, changes of the ways we do things. And it takes a few months to get through oftentimes those. And then the major losses, the maxi losses that change the meaning of our lives, the death, divorce, chronic illness. We talked about those. We talked about grief of being the many faceted response to any loss, that it is an experience that is involved with our physical, cognitive, emotional, behavioral, and spiritual lives, that grief touches us in not just the emotional way, but physically, and our minds, and the way we act, and our spiritual lives. And we talked about the journey that we go through in grief, from the loss through the endings that oftentimes are filled with the grief, the wilderness, the deep sense of hurt and pain, through the neutral zone or the messy middle time of trying to figure out who we are now and what we're all about, to ultimately new beginnings. And as I said, most people are resilient in their loss, in their grief, that they bounce back, move through it. But ultimately, grief isn't something that you complete, but rather something we endure, something that we take on. It's not something we finish. It's a new way of seeing, a new way of being in our lives. And I believe that in this journey, which can be a healing journey, there can be transformation. There can be growth. We mentioned and talked about how we move through that this is not an easy journey, but it is one that with help, we can get through. And so I mentioned the four ways, the four major things that we can do as we move through it. The need to tell our stories, the need to have a person to tell the stories to, that healing presence in our lives. Creative actions then as well, doing something that makes real the loss and the grief and a remembrance around that. And then ultimately finding meaning, finding some kind of meaning in the loss and through the grief. It is through that experience of our stories, of being able to find and know those who will be with us through our journey, through the creative experience of doing something that will make real the loss and the grief, and ultimately finding some meaning in our life now that leads us to healing and through the grief, a grief that never really ends, that never, there's no closure to grief, but rather a process of being with it and changes our lives. Now, last week as I closed, I mentioned, I just touched for a moment about two words. One was flourishing and languishing. During COVID, we have had a time of languishing, almost a sense of stagnation. I think Diane Wilson talked about a low-grade depression that many people have had. An old friend of mine in one of his earlier books, Sam Keen, wrote the fact that he talks about the blues, and that people have been in the blues, and that we, as we come out of COVID and as we come out of the losses that we've experienced and all of the grief that we've experienced as a result, we just don't know exactly where we're going. And so we kind of sit and wait. Well, the Harvard University's Human Flourishing Program, and you might want to look it up and just Google it and find out for yourself, talks about flourishing being the physical, mental, and emotional fitness of our lives. That it is the healing. It really is the healing that is a result and can take place. So that's kind of a quick sharing of where we were last week and what we did. And I'm going to bring us back together, and I have a question for Chris and Eileen, and then we're going to open it up for everybody to have an opportunity to share and to talk as much as we can through Zoom. So as I asked Chris and Eileen, one of the major questions that I've had is how do you make this transformation? We can get really stuck in grief. People do. We found it within divorce. I found it over the years with people going through death. I've found it with people who even retire and haven't been able to get out of that mode of work and life. It becomes really depressing and miserable for them. And so it is a way of how do we transform the loss? How do we make the changes? And I'm asking you, Eileen and Chris, what were the ways by which you have moved through your own loss and grief to transformation, to transcendence, to moving above it, to growth? And why don't I start with you, Eileen, and then to Chris?
Well, probably the very first thing I did was to get into a support group. The support group at least helped me talk. And I wasn't just sharing with my daughter. I have one daughter who at that time was as devastated as I was with the process of divorce. And so I went into a support group and had my chance to talk. By the end of the first 8-week program, I at least had come to grips with the idea that I was no longer married, and even though the divorce wasn't final, but the grief hit. And I was retired at the same time. I had just retired. So I had nothing else to look forward to. And I remember saying, I am going to dance again. I am going to dance again. And that was my mantra. I am going to do something to lift my spirits up again. And the old saying, you fake it till you make it, was really something else that I took on early on. And it took me about, I would say about a year to finally get through the process of divorce and cope with the idea of being single again and understanding. I mean, my daughter moved out of Tucson into Baltimore. So I was truly alone and decided that I was not going to stay alone. So I looked into what possible things were there for me to participate in. And I kind of made a wish list of things that I could possibly do. And I got into dancing, actually. And dancing was really good for my mental, physical, and psychological perspective on the world. Where I hated men and never wanted anything to do with them, I suddenly had to dance with them and give up all control to the man on the floor. And it was like, are you kidding me? I just got control of my life and you're asking me to give up all of my control to you? No way in hell. But what I discovered was that you never really do that. They're leading the dance, but you're still in control of you. And that's one thing that as I'm working with people throughout these last 19 years, which that's how long it's been, that we still have control of who we are and what we want to do, and still have the right to talk about the way we felt or feel and share that with others. And that's truly part of the healing status of whatever kind of loss it is. Because doing it alone doesn't work. At least it didn't for me. And as a result of that, I felt it was really important to get back the help that I got. So I did that through, becoming really involved in the administrative part of divorce recovery and leading groups. As a matter of fact, I'm finishing up Divorce Recovery 2, which is a continuation program next week, 9 weeks of people who are going through tough times. And then becoming part of this incredible program. Frank has been my mentor and kind of a spiritual director without being a director, if that makes sense. A friend, a spiritual friend forever, and has helped me through. And certainly finding a support system, whatever that looks like, is very important for overcoming some of the grief that we endure. As we age, as we go through life, there are so many different elements to that. This summer, I lost a dog, and people will say, "Oh, so it's just a dog." Well, that was my fur baby for almost 13 years, and to lose the animal that was so much part of my life was very difficult. So again, working through that and finding adoption again and adopting a dog from some behavioral issues has really kept me focused on that and not my own grief. Um, but I find that really it is important to find what gives you meaning. And it may be something you've never even done before as you go through this. Dancing was certainly not, I mean, I danced as a teenager, but I never in a million years thought I would get into really dancing. And I became a competitive dancer for a number of years. Now, because of some physical issues, I'm not able to dance like that anymore. That's another form of grief. But all my memories are still there, and I can still have the relationships that I created from the dance community to be part of. And finding new ways to find meaning. I'm so into quilting and painting, and I saw Maureen there too, into a writing group I just got involved in. New ways to explore my own creativity. And I urge, no matter what the situation, whether it be disability or loss from death or whatever, that we find something that will bring some happy. We have to find some kind of happy. Otherwise, we do stay in a complicated grief system, and we do stay stuck. I couldn't let grass build or moss build around my feet. I'm allergic to it. So for real, I had to find something that was going to pull me out of that. And that's how I've gotten involved in some of these other programs. Now, especially as we are, I don't think we're exiting the COVID, but at least we're muddling through. It really is important. So many organizations, activities need us to be involved and get our juices flowing, but also help our community. Titcheria through Frank and others gave me my option of being a spiritual director for folks. I had no idea what that was when I started, but I sure know now that that's what I was starved for, was that sense of spiritual direction, of knowing my own spirituality and having someone that I can share that with. My spiritual director is just an incredible woman who I met through the Titcheria program. If you need that kind of support or that kind of investigation, if you will, that part in your journey, really seek someone out that you can share yourself with. It's an incredible way to get out of whatever grief and loss. You never get out of it, as Frank said, but you can certainly move through it. And I remember asking Frank, when does this stop? When do I stop getting that punch in the stomach every time I get an email from my ex or a connection call, phone call or whatever? And he looked at me and he said, never. It's part of your past. You can't erase your past. And so that to me was my turning point. It is part of our past. All of our losses are part of our past, but we don't have to stay in those losses forever. We can move through, we can find ways to get more expressive of life and find ways to not complete the journey, but to pull us out of that messy middle and into the new us.
Thank you. Thank you, Eileen.
You're welcome.
Chris, do you want to share for a few moments, and then we'll open it up and take your questions and your thoughts.
Absolutely. And let me just say, Eileen, I just love that you danced your way through your grief. I mean, yeah, it's just a lovely metaphor too, to think about dancing your way through all this hard stuff that happened. And even though you may not be able to dance like you did, you found other ways of being creative. And yeah, anyway, that's great. Thanks, Eileen. Yeah, just briefly, you know, I just want to say too that yeah, gathering ideas today is really awesome. It's one of the ways we share our stories and share what we're going through. And to have in mind that knowledge that there is no right way or wrong way to grieve. You do it on your own time, your own timeline, what feels best to you. With Eileen, it was creativity. Someone else, it may be reading. Another person, it might be in nature. And sometimes at the very start of a very, very difficult or very traumatic loss, it may be just putting one foot in front of the other and just walking, you know, getting your cup of coffee, sitting outside, taking a walk. That may be all that you can do right at first. And just allowing yourself to be there and to know that you're doing the best that you can at that moment. And when I think back of those first, I don't know, the first days, weeks, months, even years after my son died, I don't want to say that there's one thing that helped me. There were many, many things that came about for me personally. Many things. My family, my incredible husband, our daughter. We were all grieving together. Friends who truly listened and weren't afraid of my grief. They weren't afraid of me when I was probably pretty darn scary. But they listened to me, and they just allowed me to be. The church community, St. Francis in the foothills, was amazing. Doris and Scott, I remember you coming over and giving us dinner and sitting with us and just sitting with us and talking or not talking, or I mean, those kinds of things, they may seem small, but they're huge. Frank, oh my God, Frank, you were such a support to me, such an incredible support in also some of the losses that I experienced after Paul's death. Judy, oh my God, Judy made me this show. Oh, I could go on and on. And anyway, many things contributed. I think really the thing was that most helped was people allowing me to be just where I was. There's something so incredible when we truly listen to somebody. I think listening is the greatest gift that we can give to one another. The peer support that we get. Eileen mentioned divorce recovery and the peers that you found that were going through divorces. Every person's situation is different, but they're all there for a common reason. The same with me in a suicide support group. Every person's situation was different, and yet we were all there. We could kind of get we could get it. And so peer support is huge, finding people who listen. Frank, you talked about finding meaning, you too, Eileen. Eventually getting to the point of making meaning out of the tragic event that has occurred in your life. Be it this past year and a half that we've been living with COVID. I know many of you have had tragedies and losses and just in your everyday lives, and finding a way to make some meaning out of that. Eileen, you're making meaning by being at first a part of the divorce recovery group, but then you're facilitating the groups and knowing, because it's so helpful to people. And, it doesn't have to be anything huge or humongous or newsworthy. It could be just because you've been listened to and you've been supported and you've been accepted by friends and family. I think that really helps to develop the compassion within each of us, so that as we're going through this journey, maybe then we become the better listeners to each other and we can listen to the pain that other people are going through. When I first introduced myself, I said something about the human heart. I really believe our human hearts are capable of holding an incredible amount of pain, not just ours, but each other's. And that's what I think is so helpful, to have a class or a group or whatever we want to call this afternoon, a time that we can share together. And keeping in mind that making meaning, and before I stop and let you guys talk, because I want to hear your stories, I have my phone on silent, but I just got this wonderful, a friend of mine just texted me an article. I haven't read it yet, but it's about a boy in Minnesota with a prosthetic leg. He finds a best friend in a golden retriever puppy born without a paw. That to me is making meaning. This boy is who went through, leg injury, has a prosthetic leg, is now finding meaning in this beautiful little puppy who's born without a paw. And so they're both kind of doing it together. Anyway, I can't wait to read this article afterwards, but that will be after this meeting. So I'd love to hear your stories. So I'm going to put myself on mute and listen to you.
Thank you, Chris. Just a couple of things which were said, and I reiterate them. Every one of us is going to go through loss. That's a part of our lives. Every day we go through experiences of loss, small ones, medium ones, sometimes major losses. And all of our losses may have similarities, but they're different. And the grief that we experience belongs only to you. It is yours. You are unique in your grief, in your loss, in the way we go through it. And so while we may be able to give some sense of this is some ideas, listening to the stories, having someone who can really listen with you and be there with you, being creative in some way that is an action that reminds you, that brings remembrance of the experience of the loss, and then finding meaning in the loss and finding it in the small things, as Chris said. This is where we are. So there were some questions from last week, and I know I'm going to ask Maureen, you had a question at the end last week. I wondered if you want to ask the question, and we'll start with you and then take off from there.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for remembering. And I was going to write it down and get in touch with you immediately, but got sidetracked. So I was just going over, what was my question again? But I thought of my question. You mentioned twice last week, Frank, and it intrigued me because I'm wondering what the outcome or why that was. You said that about 40 some odd% of people going through the grief after the death of a loved one. My husband died in February of 2020 after over 5 decades of marriage, so that was mine. 47% would want support groups, and about an equal amount of people don't. And I thought, how curious. I wonder what the denominator is for those who don't need a support group, because I think I could learn a lot by knowing what is it that makes people not need a support group. So that was my question. If any
Sure.
research has been done around that matter, because I could learn from that. I'm still grieving and it's 15 months. And I know the grief's gonna go on, but sometimes I get in a very depressed state and that's not who I am. Thank
I
you.
know that. I think we recognize that grief never really ends, and that I had somebody the other day that is beginning the second year of their grief, and they're saying, this is worse than the first year. This is harder than it was going through the first year. Um, and part of it is because the first year was so filled with all of the doings, the moving, the connections, and we went through COVID at the same time, the funeral, one here and one elsewhere, all those kinds of things that you couldn't have because you didn't have people. So, but just as what we've learned is from some of the research is that people, partly because of the way they've been raised, and this is, by the way, across cultures, partly because of the way they've been raised, partly because of their background, partly because of the experiences they've had in other kinds of losses, just move on. It's like they say, well, this is the way life is, and they can take it, and they don't look for others to help them, really. Now, they may go through another loss at some other time, and they may fall apart. And they may come back and visit the loss that they're going through now. But on a given time, about half the people are pretty resilient and never seek out support groups, never seek out counselors. This is true with divorce as well. They just don't, they just go through it. And I'm not sure, except that it's, they see their own inner strength and they just move on. The 40% that really need and look for and search out others to talk to, other ways of relating, whether it be a support group or a counselor, or even by journaling and doing those things, they seek out some way by which they tell their story. We see those with divorce recovery. Most of the bereavement groups in town, those are where people go. And then there are those 10% that are left that are chronically grieving, that oftentimes never search out anybody, never look for anybody, but are just simply depressed and down, and they may remain there for a long time without help. Okay, let's open it up and just kind of wave if you have a question or a comment or a story. And I'll try and catch you. Okay, Mary.
Hi. I just wanted to say thank you, Eileen. I went through the divorce recovery classes in 2019, 2020. In fact, we ended the second class right before the pandemic started. And I had been in an apartment. I had moved into an apartment after living in a home with my husband for 30 years. So I was grieving the loss of my husband, the loss of my home, and then having the pandemic hit and not being able to go to church, not being able to gather with friends, and family. It was really hard. I did talk to people on the phone a lot. I did Zoom. I did a couple of Jim's Zoom classes. I did Zoom with my family back east. The other thing that happened is my mom was in a nursing home and she had Alzheimer's and she died in November. But I wasn't able to see her normally I would have gone to visit her last summer. And seeing her in person was so much better because she would respond to touch. She would respond to you if you were in person with her, but not on a screen. We did Zoom with her in the nursing home, but it did feel like a lot of losses to me last year. But I think because there were, because I stayed connected to people. And I have 2 sons and I stayed connected to them. And I spent a lot of time on the phone, but it was very helpful. And I took a lot of walks. Being out in nature helped also. And I'm actually retiring in a couple weeks and looking forward to it. I'm not sad at all. I'm like really excited because I'm so tired of working. So I'm looking forward to my life kind of opening up, as things are opening up from the pandemic and I'm going to have more free time. But last year was, yes, a very tough year. And anyway, thanks for letting me share.
Thank you. Nancy,
I just want to remind everybody that we're recording this, and if there's something that's confidential, maybe we won't post it, or I just wanted to remind people of that. I'm sorry. But I have a question, Frank, about the introverts versus extroverts. Has research found that by people being able to talk about it, it's more helpful than some people maybe in denial and stuffing it down? I mean, is there any research about that, introvert versus extrovert, and how people can manage?
yeah, there is, and it's interesting. There's differences both in terms of introverts, extroverts, in terms of male and female, and how we grieve and how we go through the experience of grief on all of those. As an introvert, one gains their strengths and their interests from their internal self. Extrovert from others and being with others, and all of us are both somewhat introverted and extroverted by it. But we find that introverts are less likely to go, and especially male introverts are less likely to be involved with reaching out to other people. But that's, I think it's not a great major issue. I think we have a variety of reasons why people reach out and why they don't. So Chris or Eileen, you want to add to it?
Yes, it's interesting again in how people grieve, and everyone does it differently. And Nancy, along with Mary, I think you had mentioned about or somebody about the people joining or not joining a support group. Just my own experience, I found it was amazingly helpful. And I don't know if I think I'm more introverted than I am extroverted, but I found support, peer support, talking, I had to get it out, was really, really helpful. My husband he maybe went to a support group once or twice, and he found his own way. He's more of a, I want to say just more, maybe, I don't want to say he's more of a quiet person, but he found his own way of being, of grieving. And it was more of an individual approach. He did talk with people every now and then, but not to the extent that I did and that I needed to. So again, I just think it's a matter of who you are. And who you are is how you're going to grieve. And again, there's no right or wrong way. So I hope that answered a little bit of your question, Nancy.
Sure. Eileen.
First of all, I want to say, Mary, you look beautiful. So something must be working right. That's great. Secondly, I always start off groups with saying, if you know of anyone that needs help, please help them to come in, because sometimes just knowing somebody else, introverts do struggle, I think, coming into support groups. Maybe not so much going for therapy, because that's more one-on-one base, but going into support groups may be difficult for some introverts. Once there, though, I couldn't tell you who were introverts and extroverts by the end of the 8 or 9 weeks. That people trust each other, learn to trust each other, and start sharing. Something that was said, and I'm trying to think what it was. I think I know what I was going to say, that when the pandemic hit and everyone was forced inward, that really helped a lot of people and did not help a lot of people. But the introverts, I think, fared a little bit better because they were used to being internal. One of the things we encouraged was journaling, writing, getting their feelings out, no matter how that was happening. If they had Zoom meetings or Zoom ways of talking to other people, as Mary did, that certainly is helpful. But oftentimes we don't always want to share everything with other people all the time. And it can get somewhat difficult for those who aren't used to sharing emotions to all of a sudden start sharing. So that's when we really suggest taking care, however that means. If it means writing, if it means I've known people who have joined OLLI, the classes over at the University of Arizona for seniors that are suddenly learning again, and that process, and they don't have to go anywhere. It's all online. So that is a connection that they didn't have before. And finding, as Chris would say, finding meaning, making something of ourselves. What we find in, I usually say, if we don't do our work, if we don't work through our grief, then eventually it will do us in. And even though there are a lot of people that can transition without any help, 10, maybe 15 years down the line, something will happen in their life when all of a sudden they're not sure who they are and what their purpose is anymore. And we're hearing that a lot with divorced people. What's my purpose now? I don't know. My roles are changed.
Harvey. You're muted, Harvey.
Probably a good thing I was muted because I'm sitting here coughing and cacking and stuff. I got an asthma problem or allergy problem. Hey, anyway, Frank, last time you talked about being stuck, and today you used that same term. And I just mentioned, how do you know when you're stuck?
You know, I really believe that we do know. We do. We have a sense that we're not moving. I like that word, languishing, that we feel stagnant, that we feel like we're just kind of wandering back and forth and nothing is, we're not moving anywhere. We're not excited about anything. We have a harder time getting out of bed. We've got the blues. I think we pretty much know that. If you don't feel that, then I expect you're not. I really do think we have a sense of ourselves much better than what trying to get somebody else to diagnose that something's wrong with us. Because I think we do know whether we're we're stuck or not. Well, at least I found that people really do have a sense about it. They feel stuck. They feel blue. They feel caught. So I'm not sure that answers.
Yeah, it does. I think I think the reason for asking that is, how do you know when you're really just, hey, this is a part of grief and this is a part of what I'm going to be feeling, and when do you feel as if, hey, you're not just stuck, you're not just languishing. So and again, that's something that I think you're probably right, that people who've come to me in the past, it's been because they knew they were hurting, and they weren't moving through it.
Yeah, Eileen?
To feel sadness and to feel temporary depression is very common when grief hits. But to spend many years not moving forward, not feeling any better than they did when that initially happens, is when we start looking at what we call complicated grief, or the stuck part. It doesn't mean that you get through it and you're just happy-go-lucky all the time. We will all have moments of sadness over the same situations that have happened in our life. But if we don't do anything differently, it's like that definition of insanity, doing the same thing over and over again and not doing anything different. After a number of years, then that is what I would consider being complicated.
And it also occurs to me that that feeling may become so familiar that, and we may believe that that is life, and therefore have no impetus to move beyond that.
Absolutely.
Good point.
That's true. Yeah, Chris?
Yeah, Diane, that is a really good point, that you can get so used to saying the same thing over and over. I do believe there's a process that you do have to, in some instances, have to kind of maybe relive or think, or what they call the coulda, shoulda, wouldas. If I did this, if only I did that. That's a process of moving along. But when you stay in that, and after a while, when you are continuing to do that and there's no movement, and there's no even a glimpse of acceptance as to what's happened or what's, what your event is. And oftentimes it's the person, and I'm glad you brought that up, Diane, because oftentimes the person doesn't even know that they're in that cycle downward, because they're so used to it. That's where I think it's important that whether it be a counselor, a therapist, a friend, a peer, they might notice that and then steer the person toward professional help, because I do believe at that point, when it gets complicated like that, it moves beyond peer support and friend support, where that person really may need some professional help to help get unstuck.
Martha,
Thanks for
you were
bringing
going to
that
say
up.
something. Martha, you're muted. Martha, you're muted. Martha's muted.
Sorry about that. Okay. Yeah, I lost my son, which is a little bit different grief than I've heard anybody else talking about. That's one of the reasons why one of the best things I went to was the group called Compassionate Friends, which was a group of people who had lost their children in many different ways. And that particular group meant a lot to me. And I did go to different counselors. I didn't like the first two I went to. My husband was very lucky. He found the best counselor there was, and he went to him. and that really helped him along a lot better. You know, I kind of failed several times, and just the other week, I have saved all of my son's writings and everything, every piece that he has touched, I have. And I ran across his essays he wrote in class when he was 14 years old about what he felt like being in a classroom. And he had a disability that made it not easy for him to be in school. And he talked about, well, one of the things was he didn't like the way other students treated the teachers. He especially didn't like the way they treated substitute teachers. And, you know, it's just, it broke my heart because, wow, this guy was so sensitive, and I've forgotten how, I don't know, because of his disability or what it was, but it made him so sensitive and such a loving child. And there was a lot of heartbreak along the line. There was the time he had to give up horseback riding, which was trot, therapeutic riding, which was one of the best things he ever did. And he had to give it up because he had to have a catheter, of all things. I mean, you know, it's bad enough, but the people there were so nice to him. But how sad it made him and I both on the things he had to give away. I mean, it wasn't just death, it was the losses all the way along. And I consider probably divorce and different things like that. Losing a spouse is often after a long illness. My son was basically diagnosed with this illness at 5 and died when he was 21. And he ended up bedridden. And so there's a lot of losses along the way. And you can't get over something like that. And so, you know, I've kept every piece of paper he's written, in part just to remember him. But, you know, touching some of those pieces of paper, especially when it's his thoughts, all that grief comes back up.
Sure.
You know, you never get through the grief.
I
It's always there.
And I
So,
think part of that, what we
yeah.
know is that it'll continue, and we reconcile ourselves to it. We find a way by which we become a part of the experience of the grief, but we are different as a result of who we are. And that's what you've discovered and what you've found. And so thanks for sharing that. Others here, yes, Sam.
Hey, Frank, it's good to see you. I'm sorry I missed 99% of this meeting. I'm glad to hear Martha say something nice about Compassionate Friends. Phyllis and I were in Compassionate Friends for 17 years. The first 3 years we were going and just attending. The important thing was that in all these meetings, you attend, you go, even though it may not be the right thing to do. You may say, well, I'm tired of it. I'm crying a lot. Well, you keep going, and sometime you stop crying, and then you start helping others. And it was the last 12 or so years that we were in a helping role instead of a being helped role. And the difference was we went from dark gray to bright colors, I think, over the period of 3 years. Losing a child, Martha's absolutely right. It's a difficult thing to do. You're not expecting it. You may expect to lose a partner after 60 years or something, but a child at age 23, for no reason, be different if you've been in an automobile wreck or if you've been taking drugs. None of that happened. We walked in one morning, and I walked in one morning in his bedroom, and he was dead. That's just the straight of it. He just had not wakened. And They thought maybe it was sleep apnea or something. He died, the medical report said he died of natural causes. What person, age 23, healthy, dies of natural causes? I don't know. We don't have the answer. We gave up trying to figure that out 3 years after we were into it. But all of you, every one of you that have come to these meetings, you're getting help or you're giving help. You're doing one or the other. And hopefully it's the other. You're giving help to other people. This is a fantastic place. I'm sorry I missed it all. I need help on something called remembering what date it is, what time it is, and making the darn computer work right so that I can get into these meetings. Thanks.
I'm glad you're here, Sam, and thanks for sharing. So, yeah, Daniel.
You're muted, Daniel. You're not
I
now.
just unmuted, I thought.
Yeah,
You
you're
hear me now?
unmuted now. You're okay.
Yeah, most of you folks don't even know who I am. My new partner is Ann Rouse, so that's how I'm connected to this group of people. I came from California. My wife,
It's okay.
Pat, my wife Pat died of cancer on 3/3/20. And that's why I came here to be with my family. Couldn't stay there anymore, our apartment. And live with family for a while. And anyways, after a while, I don't know if you've heard of that group called Our Time for seniors. Anyway, that's how I found Ann, through that group called Our Time. And anyways, she died of cancer. I took care of her for the last 7 months at our home. And the last thing she said to me, tried to say to me anyway, was, "I love you." And I was feeding her, and she died. And you can tell it's still kind of raw. And I don't know if I need to have a group eventually or not. Or I don't have no. Ann's been helping me a lot, and family's been helping me a lot to get through it. I'm okay for the most part. I have my moments still, getting
Absolutely.
through it all.
And thank you for sharing, Daniel, because I know, when we have lost, when we have gone through the loss as a result of death and the
We were
experience,
married almost 50 years, 49 years,
we carry all of those losses.
long
And
time.
it's pretty fresh for you. So don't put yourself down for it. Allow yourself to share the experience with others. That's part of the experience that as we share, we really we're able to express it. It moves through us.
Most of my family is in Tucson, so that's why I came here and lived with them for quite a while. And then I've been with Ann since November last year, and we're happy right now, and things are going smoothly so far.
Good. Thank you for sharing.
Daniel, I'm really glad that you're here. I'm really glad that you're here. Thank you for being here and letting us know what's happening with you.
You're welcome.
I was just going to say, I admire you, Daniel, for coming to a group of people that you may not know very well and that don't know you and opening your heart. That's incredible. That shows strong character.
Normally I'm blabbering, people tell me to be quiet.
Never. Don't ever. The other thing is, can you just, this is way out of the context. There's a gorgeous painting behind you, and I would love
Oh.
to see what it looks like.
It's just a scene of a phoenix and a pyramid and a couple what do you call it, Black Panthers. Can you see
So,
it?
yes, thank you. In a way, you are the phoenix.
Okay.
You're rising up above.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I took care of her the last 7 months in our home and watched her die slowly but surely. And then that last moment when I was feeding her supper around 7:30 at night, she took her last breath, and I said, "I love you," and she was holding my hand, and then she tried her best to say, "I love you" back, and that was that. She died, and
My heart goes out to you.
3/3/20. We were married almost 49 years.
Other thoughts here? Other questions, thoughts, comments? Chris, go ahead.
Yeah, I just wanted to say that, there's a word that just keeps coming over and over to me, and it's integration. That this grief, and Frank touched on, I think we've all touched on it, that grief is not something to get over. It's not something we will never forget the person that died, or an event that happened in our lives. And we will never miss that person. And that's not the goal. I think the goal is to integrate the grief along with the happy times and the joyful times and the sad times and all the things that make up your life. And if you can almost kind of think of it as integrating right here in your heart, it's all right here. And it's you're becoming the person that you are. We live in a society where people want to be happy and positive and get over things really quickly. Well, you know what? That's kind of that's not in the real world, is it? So integrating it within ourselves and with all the things that have happened, can just be part of who you are. My daughter had this one lovely phrase, and I when she said it was several years ago, it was on the anniversary of our son's death, her brother, and she said this, she said, "I'm grateful for my grief. It's the most humanizing thing I know." I sat with that for a while, and I thought, it's easy to feel joy and happiness, isn't it? It's hard to feel grief because it's hard. Grief is hard work. But it's the most humanizing thing that we know. And we can eventually feel grateful for that's made us maybe just a little more compassionate. Thank you.
Any other thoughts as we?
I would like to add too, that I think it's really important to talk about and remember the person who's passed on. And sometimes friends are little reluctant to do that, but something about the vitality of that person's life continues to need to be cherished. We had a grandson who died about 10 years ago. And when our daughter was here this last week, we had lots of memories of Pelly and laughing about things and then crying about missing him, but mostly about remembering the way we cherished him and still carry him in our hearts. And I think that's really important to continue the language around the person who's passed on.
Diane, you are so right. One of the things that they've often said in Compassion Friends was, every time you find a penny, it's your child saying hi. And many of us collected pennies, and some people got dimes, some got quarters, but we saved a bag and bag of pennies, which we then converted into a savings account, which we donated to some church. I think you probably have heard of it. It's called St. Francis in the Foothills. We figured that was a good place because when Robert was alive and he'd go to church with us, as soon as the commentary started, he fell asleep, he'd snore. And that made, it was something to look forward to. Also, I got a little pendant with Rob's picture that was taken, the picture taken about 3 months before he died. And I have always worn it. Phyllis has one too. And it was people at Compassion Friends that got that for us. And I don't mind saying, yeah, Rob's been standing and talking to me the other day. He says things like, Dad, get off of it. Dad, relax. Don't get so uptight. I hear that a lot from him. And I don't mind that. If your loved one is talking to you and people make fun of you, forget it. Just go right ahead and let them talk. Have a good conversation. It's such a relieving thing, for a reliving thing for what you're doing. So that's it.
Thank you. That's true. Thank you, Diane, for reminding us again. And I think that's absolutely the case, that as we remember, and remembering is so important in the process of grieving. So not only in terms of telling our stories, but continuing to tell the stories that are there and are there a part of our lives, as with the person who has died, or the divorces we've gone through, or the other losses, even the mini losses, or the role losses of people moving from one place to another, to tell a story about where they were or what was. All of us need those stories to be told. And that's part of the loss, part of the growth in the experience.
Yeah, it reminds me of a thing that David Viscott used to say, a psychiatrist in New York, said that when regret turns to remembrance, you know that you've turned a corner.
That's right. Thank you for sharing.
Vicki, I think you had something to say. Is that right?
Me? So
Okay.
I heard someone say not too long ago, and I can't remember who it was, that grief is love with nowhere to go. And when I heard that, I thought about it, and it makes a lot of sense to me. I had to euthanize my dog a couple months ago, and it's been very difficult to go through, and I still cry every day. So I've lost a role, and my role was a fur baby mama. And there are many days I feel like, especially in the beginning, I feel like I have no purpose. But I still hold on to that saying that grief is love with no place to go. And I take it day by day. But I do feel like I've lost my role as a caring for my pet. And there's still days I feel like I have no purpose without her.
Thank you for sharing. We have come close to the end, and if there's one more last question today, we'll.
Is there a group that I could maybe join? You talk about groups, and I've thought about it, but I don't, is it a group I could maybe join that somebody could tell me about?
Can I offer you a suggestion? Because I did it twice. Casa de la Luz Hospice on Zoom. Every Friday, there are 2 groups that meet. You can come in casually, and from that, there are 6-week sessions that can be signed up for. I entered 2 of the 6-week sessions. You're supplied a book, you do journaling and writing. There's no more than 6 people that meet in it every week for 6 weeks. But the Friday afternoon is one anyone can come into after you've lost anybody. And it was very, very helpful to me. All you have to do is contact Casa de la Luz Hospice. They're fabulous. Thank you.
And if you call them 544-9890, Daniel, just put it down. 544-9890 is the CASA number. That's one bereavement group in the community. There are others that are here. And part of what I think that Diane and Sue, the mental health committee of the Stevens Ministry, both came together to put this through was because they recognized that loss has been such a major part of our life in this last year. And as I said, the little things, the medium things, and the major life things, and they will still be around. I encourage you to reach out. I want to encourage you to reach out to the Stevens Ministry. If you just to talk to somebody and to have somebody to talk to who can be there and be a friend and listen with real depth. So you can contact Nancy, contact Sue, contact the church office, and just simply say, I'd like to have a Stevens minister. And they'll hook you up and they'll connect. So I encourage that. And I know that this is an ongoing issue. And if we need to, we'll come back and do some more. So any last burning issue that you want to say anything about?
I'd just like to reach out to Vicki. I totally get that feeling. And if you would like to talk, you certainly can get in touch with me.
Thank you. Thank you.
Peggy, you were going to say something.
I just wanted to say that something I heard that really helped me was grief. Well, grief goes from occupying the space in your mind to residing in your heart.
Thank you. Yes.
And every time you see a butterfly, remember that it started out as a caterpillar and it died, in quotes. Didn't really die, but it went into a state of change, metamorphosis that came out with something beautiful. And that can happen with your grief, even though it's a child or something else, certainly a dog, whatever. Remember that you go through it. You don't get over it. It's still there, but you go through it and you change, hopefully, for better, or butterfly or whatever.
Thank you, Sam.
And Vicki,
Yes.
I just love what you said about grief is love turned inward. And
Yeah.
it's, I too just really, your dog, I mean, our dogs, our animals are our family. And I just so appreciate that you said that about your puppy and your fur baby mama. And yeah, and the amount of grief is a direct expression of the amount of love that we gave to, whether it be our people, relationship, pets, whatever. So thank you, Vicki. And thank you all, actually.
And thank you, Jim, for kind of being here with us and doing Zoom for us here. So yes, Garnet, do you want to?
Yes, I want that quote done again. Grief goes from occupying your mind to.
Grief goes from occupying the space in your mind to residing in your heart.
Residing. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
Let's just take a minute then, and again, just quiet ourselves, allowing ourselves to just be present, take a breath, allow ourselves to relax for a moment as we come to this end. Thank you for being present. Blessings on all of you. Have a wonderful, wonderful continuation of this time. Blessings. Thank you.
You.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank
Thank
you.
Thank you, Frank. Thank you.